Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Pat McCormick, City Club President, and I'd like to welcome members and guests alike, those of you who are joining us here today in the Governor Hotel, and those of you who are listening on OPB radio or watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Today, we're honored to have Steve Wright, Administrator for the Bonneville Power Administration, address the City Club before he retires next week. But first, some announcements. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners ensures that we put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank our media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine, and our Friday Forum winter sponsors, Bank of the Cascades, CenturyLink, Miller Nash, Regents Blue Cross Blue Shield, and The Standard. We're grateful for your support and commitment to City Club's mission. Please join me in a warm round of applause for our sponsors. Membership in City Club matters. It connects you with your city and fellow citizens, gives you a voice in public policy, and offers you both serious and fun ways to learn about critical issues facing our community. As part of our membership drive, which launched this month, new members can save $25 on their membership. And every new member and members who refer new members will be entered into a drawing to have lunch or coffee with club members such as Earl Blumenauer, Kate Brown, Ted Wheeler, Jeff Kogan, and others. Today, we're drawing the name of a person who will have coffee with Portland City Commissioner Dan Saltzman. This week's winner is Marilyn Turner. She's a CPA with Grant Thornton. Congratulations, Marilyn, on coffee with Dan Saltzman. Next week's program will be the State of the County with Multnomah County Chair Jeff Kogan. You can learn more about future City Club events on our website, pdxcityclub.org. We will be having a Q&A session with Steve Wright at the end of today's programs. Members, please come to the microphone to ask your question. For all of our audience members, please locate the index cards on the center of your table and write your questions on them during the forum. We will collect them prior to the start of the Q&A session. And now our program. Bonneville is a publicly owned utility serving the Pacific Northwest for 75 years. The power it creates has been a key driver of local economic growth, but not all in the Pacific Northwest have shared equally in those benefits. The development of the BPA system has come at a significant cost to Native Americans and the Columbia River ecosystem. Steve Wright has been telling the story of this history as the region commemorates BPA's 75th anniversary. Steve began serving as acting BPA administrator in 2000, just at the beginning of the West Coast electricity crisis. He was appointed administrator in 2002 and has led BPA through the rapid development of wind energy in the Northwest and historic agreements for fish and wildlife restoration. He's the second longest serving administrator in BPA's history, but his tenure comes to a close next week when he retires after 32 years. Please help me welcome Steve Wright, BPA Administrator.
Thank you, Pat, and it's truly an honor to be here. I think this is the third time I've had the opportunity to speak to the City Club, although I think it's been nearly a decade since I've been here, and a lot has happened in that time. I do want to tell you a little bit about Bonneville, but I want to start with a quick story. Nearly everyone who works for the Bonneville Power Administration shares a common experience. At some point, they mention where they work, after which they are asked if they have to drive up to the dam every day to get to work. How many of you have done that to a Bonneville employee at some time? While we understand that a big part of the Portland landscape is Bonneville Dam and the associated facilities up there, we are also surprised at how little understanding there is that the Bonneville Dam is only one piece of an immense federal hydro system spread across the Pacific Northwest that creates a unique economic and environmental advantage for our region. 31 federal hydroelectric projects spread across the states of Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana, including the largest generating plant in North America in the form of the famous Grand Coulee Dam, the star of a recent public broadcasting segment on television. And while BPA does not provide the electricity for Portland, it does provide more than 40% of the electricity for the state of Oregon to cities like Eugene and McMinnville, Pendleton, Forest Grove, and Salem. Governor Kitzhaber, in his recently released Oregon Energy Plan, describes the power delivered by Bonneville from dams operated by the Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation as creating substantial value for Oregon through low-cost, reliable, and emission-free power that provides an economic advantage not found outside the Pacific Northwest, as well as the principal source of balancing reserves for managing fluctuations in wind generation and other renewable energy resources. To distribute that hydropower, Bonneville Power was created to build transmission to connect Bonneville Dam right here to the city of Portland. It also connects the Northwest to California and to Canada, producing billions of dollars of benefits to Northwest ratepayers through a more efficient operation of the generating resources. It is an immense transmission system spreading across the Northwest. It is a complex, interconnected, and integrated system in which every player impacts each other. And in fact, the electricity system of the West is the largest machine in the world, and it operates at the speed of light. Bonneville does more than that, though. It operates one of the largest and foremost energy efficiency programs in the country. And it operates a program that provides you, if you're a Portland General Electric ratepayer, benefits that come in the form of $75 million that reduces rates. And you can find that credit identified right on your bill. Bonneville is one of the largest not-for-profit entities operating in the country with over $3 billion in annual revenue. And along with the Corps of Engineers, Bonneville manages the most successful treaty in the world between governments managing an international river with our Canadian partners that provides coordinated operations and, importantly to Portland and Vancouver, flood control protection. The bottom line is this system is important to you and it affects your lives in a daily way, although it may be invisible to you most of the time. Now, as Pat said, next Friday I will retire after 32 years of service, the last 12 of which I've had the honor of leading the agency. And during the course of this talk, I want to share with you my two key learnings from this experience, as well as share with you some of the key unfinished business that I leave behind that will affect your lives as people who live in Portland and, just as importantly, as residents of the Northwest. My key learning number one, just as a result of choosing to live in the Northwest, you are the beneficiary of an electric power system that is the envy of the rest of the world. A power system that is low cost, reliable, clean, and renewable, and is a public asset, which means it's owned by you. So I want to start today by telling you a little bit of the history of this system. This past year, Bonneville celebrated its 75th anniversary, but the history I want to share with you is not so much the history of the Bonneville Power Administration, because at BPA, we are not owners of this system. We are the stewards of these assets on your behalf, all the people who live in the Northwest. And this whole system is built around the power of one thing that unites all of us who live in the Northwest, and that's the Columbia River. The Columbia is a big river, the fourth largest in North America, and it sits on the side of a very steep hill. And I like to tell a story to illustrate this. Imagine for a moment 2 drops of water. One falls just at the top of the Rockies, but a little bit to the east. And it has to flow all the way down the east side of the Rockies, down the Missouri, down the Mississippi to get to the Gulf of Mexico. And the other drop of water falls 1 inch to the west, and it comes down the west side of the Rockies, down the Columbia to the Pacific. And if you've got that picture in your mind, think about how much difference there is in the distance. In fact, in terms of river miles, it's a factor of 4. And so what we have in the Northwest is a big, big river on the side of a very, very steep hill. And that's what creates the opportunity to produce a lot of electricity and a lot of power. Lewis and Clark were no strangers to big rivers when they got here, having come up the Mississippi and the Missouri, and yet they marveled at the cascade of sound and power that was coming from the Columbia. They knew they had found something that would be of great use to the country, but it took a while to unleash the power of the river. In fact, even early into the early part of the last century, this region was confronted with substantial poverty. Those of us who work to earn the title of trustworthy stewards of this river have etched in our minds the purpose of why our agencies came to exist some 75 years ago. It is, as envisioned by the forefathers of this fabulous hydro system, that the public waterways should and must be used for the public good. I'd like to take you back for a moment to 1937. I don't believe any of us can truly comprehend the perspective of Midwestern Dust Bowl refugees who braved unfathomable adversity to claw their way across the American landscape to this exotic place. They came seeking water, and when they arrived, it was water they got, in the form of one of the largest and most powerful rivers in the world, only to be confronted by a brutal fact that men and women cannot live by water alone. It had to somehow be harnessed. Its power had to be connected to their lives. Woody Guthrie, whom the BPA hired to roam the Columbia, captured the desperation caused by being so close yet so far, writing, "My eyes are crossed, my back's in a cramp, trying to read my Bible by my coal oil lamp. Oregon State is mighty fine if you're hooked up to the power line, but I'm just a mile from the end of that line." And when you think of the words backbreaking labor, I want to encourage you to try to absorb what life meant for people who carried gallons of water at a time, every day and every night, because there was no electricity for pumping. And for children, forever imprisoned by the dead-end sentence of a third-grade education because their raw physical energy was literally critical to the survival of their families. These folks were quite conscious that their lives could have been different had affordable electricity been within their grasp. So with the assistance of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the Bonneville and Grand Coulee dams were built, putting tens of thousands of citizens to work at the height of the Depression, building infrastructure that would benefit the people who choose in the Pacific Northwest for decades to come. And in so doing, Roosevelt was emphatic that the benefits be spread to all the people who live in the 4 Northwest states that comprise the Columbia River Basin. The legislation that made all this possible was sponsored in a bipartisan, multi-state fashion, a tradition that continues to this day. The idea was revolutionary. Electricity from large dams would be available for only the cost to produce it. No profit would be generated, and transmission would be built to deliver power to the people. The dams would also provide vehicles to manage the devastating floods that plagued those who lived along the river, and would provide the capability to irrigate nearly 3 million acres of land that produces more than $2 billion in annual crop value today. Those same structures would also create a navigable river where barges could penetrate the heart of the Northwest to transport timber and wheat and fruit and wool to the world's ports, ultimately creating the largest wheat and barley export gateway in the United States, moving goods with 1/4 of the emissions compared against truck or rail, and supporting tens of thousands of jobs in the Northwest. So outsized in scale, so stunning was this vision, our lives in the Northwest today would be unrecognizable, with the sole exception of the majestic beauty that surrounds us, without the laws which conceived this hydropower and transmission system. It did not come without fierce resistance that was blunted with even fiercer conviction. It was taunted as power for jackrabbits and coyotes because the Northwest population was so small and poor they could never afford to pay for these assets. And it was denounced as socialism and lunacy. In fact, a vote on the construction of Grand Coulee was passed by only 199 to 196 in the House of Representatives. Denounced until December 7th, 1941, that is. We naturally think of war on the battlefields of Iwo Jima or Normandy, but World War II was another kind of battle, a race for industrial mobilization. President Harry Truman said that America might not have won the war without Grand Coulee and Bonneville Dam. Power from the Columbia produced the aluminum for 60,000 planes and built 1/4 of all the ships that sailed for the Allies in World War II, as well as the power for the Manhattan Project. This is a place that distinguished itself on a global scale as a bastion of freedom. 67 years have passed since the war ended. In that time, the public interest has evolved, retaining much of the original focus on economic development, but adding to it the strong Northwest ethic of love for and stewardship of the land and the water. The system has been built out such that the opportunities for hydropower development on the main stem, Columbia, and Snake Rivers have been completed, with a system that amazingly translates in excess of 90% of the energy in falling water into electricity. The vast array of economic and environmental benefits derived from this regional system is worth contemplating. The potentially devastating floods averted, especially for Portland, by working collaboratively across the entire Columbia River Basin, including a model international treaty in partnership with our Canadian neighbors. How many folks remember 1996 and how far the water came up in downtown Portland? Remember the volunteers piling the sandbags along the downtown waterfront. Think what that would have been like without the flood control protection that reduced the flow from the dams in the Willamette Valley, as well as reducing the flow in the Columbia to create a sink for all that water that was coming through the Willamette. And we have some of the lowest electric rates in the country that incent job creation, attracting the industries of tomorrow and leaving more money in the pockets of people across the Northwest, including you. Let's put this in context. Power from the federal hydropower system costs roughly $15 a megawatt hour. Now, I know the units may not mean much to you, but to put this in context, the cheapest resource available today is energy efficiency at roughly double that cost. Wind or natural gas are easily 3 or 4 times that cost. Our friends in California are quite pleased at bringing their solar cost down to roughly 10 times the cost of the federal hydro system. This is an inexpensive resource. And the fact that roughly 60% of our electricity in the Northwest comes from hydropower is the primary reason our rates are lower than other parts of the country. It is not possible to replace the output of the hydro system without there being negative rate consequences for Northwest ratepayers. And this is a renewable electric power system that is the nation's largest provider of electricity producing 0 air emissions. No sulfur dioxide, no nitrous oxide, no mercury, no particulates. In fact, without the Columbia River hydro system, there would be somewhere around 15 more coal-fired power plants operating in the Northwest. Pause for a moment and think about what life would be like with 15 more coal plants operating here. Think about the smog in the gorge and the clouding of the view of Mount Hood. Then think about the economic challenges that we'd be created by trying to replace all those coal plants with resources that provide no air emissions. The system provides funding for one of the world's foremost energy efficiency programs, helping us to meet the growth needs in the region in a manner that helps to keep our electric bills low and the air clean. Wind projects producing even more energy than Bonneville Dam, located not coincidentally within 100 miles of the Bonneville Dam. We have good wind in the Columbia Gorge, but not the best in the West. The dramatic expansion of wind power is in part due to the availability of this fabulous transmission system and the ability to deal with the intermittent nature of wind with a hydro system. For example, electric power mostly cannot be stored, and loads and resources must balance at all times instantaneously, or else the lights go out. When you flip the switch someplace, a generator needs to turn a little bit quicker. Now, when you flip the switch, it does not make the wind blow harder, but a hydro unit can release some more water and turn the turbine and make it go a little quicker. This is a system that is owned by the public and accountable to you. And I will tell you that our retail utility customers, who are our partners in delivering power to the people, persist in keeping us honest on that point every single day. Oh, and by the way, here is something else that's really unique. As promised by Roosevelt himself, an infrastructure investment that has been fully repaid to the U.S. Treasury with interest. There are no subsidies in the system. All of these things are made possible by the power of this huge, resilient, and life-sustaining river. All of these things are brought to you by a cadre of public servants in the true sense of the word. People who find their work to be meaningful and important because they know it's about serving their friends, neighbors, and relatives only on a grand regional scale. So countless people were emancipated from the grip of poverty, freedom was secured, lives were saved, our quality of life has been enhanced, and our air is the cleanest in the nation as a result of this system. What could possibly tug at our conscience in the shadow of those accomplishments? Well, the development of the river has exacted a cost in terms of the native fish and wildlife that inhabited the river's reach, and a cost to the cultural and spiritual life of the people who relied most on the river's natural bounty and received the least from the development of the system, the region's native tribes. What has been done over the history of this river for the greater good should have been greater still. Today, with broad and bipartisan support, we seek to do better. Just a few years ago and up the river a ways, Terry Gowdy Rambler of the Yakama Nation Tribal Council expressed through a veil of tears that the mists of Salado Falls would never again be felt on her face, but that she had real hope for the first time that we would find a way to walk forward in partnership. And Ron Suppa, then chair of the Warm Springs Tribe, said that we came as adversaries and litigators, but we leave as partners. Those statements came at an event to celebrate the signing of the Columbia Basin Fish Accords, a moment when the participants chose peace and progress over continued litigation. A commitment of $1 billion of ratepayer money over 10 years to improve juvenile salmon survival downstream, restoration of tributaries throughout the basin to enhance spawning and rearing habitat, and hatchery improvements. On that day, we chose gravel-to-gravel management as an alternative to gavel-to-gavel litigation. That spirit of collaboration and partnership to solve problems is true to the vision that is the foundation of this system. Together, we are beginning to right the wrongs, and the evidence is clear. The largest fish and wildlife restoration program in the world, created across this region, and vastly expanded in the last 5 years, has halted and is reversing the decline of salmon in the Columbia River Basin. Now, don't get me wrong, that is not to say that the problem is solved. We are investing in many new technologies, including more than $1 billion of ratepayer money and massive equipment installed at the dams to aid juvenile fish passage. But the data so far suggests that the actual biological performance is meeting or exceeding the performance predicted when this strategy was adopted. Much remains to be done, but there is also much to be optimistic about. Moreover, the relationship between the agencies with responsibility to manage this federal hydro system and the region's salmon tribes are immeasurably improved, as I have heard repeatedly over the last 5 years and as recently as earlier this week in a meeting with the Yakima Tribal Chairman and Council members. Roll on Columbia. This song that hopefully many of you know has been an anthem for the Northwest. With those words, Woody Guthrie spoke to the physical and spiritual power of the river. And in the decades since that power, the power to bring us together in regional common purpose, has allowed the dawn to prevail over the darkness. It brings together the people of Oregon and Washington and Idaho and Montana. It brings together people of all races and creeds, all of us who call the Northwest home. This river enriches us, it enlivens us, and it electrifies us. And that leads to my second key thought for you today. Despite the headlines over major issues that confront us, bipartisanship and collaboration in the political arena is not dead. The issues confronting Bonneville generate considerable controversy, and I can attest has provided gist for many newspapers across the region. Where there is great value in this system, there is also the potential for great discord as parties argue over how big their share of the pie should be. We have seen this up close and personal in terms of customer versus customer, state versus state, and the biggest debate of our time, economy versus the environment. Yet we have also witnessed a great coming together, often facilitated by the Northwest Congressional Delegation, that allowed us to resolve thorny issues in a bipartisan and collaborative manner. We hear the stories about the grand old days of Senators Hatfield, Packwood, Jackson, Magnuson, McClure, Mansfield, and Representatives Foley and Ullman, all who controlled key committees in the Congress, how they worked together and used their political power for the benefit of the region. I'm here to tell you, as someone who has had the opportunity for most of the last 25 years to work closely with all 25 of the Senate and House members that represent the Northwest, they have seniority, they have strength, and they have a tremendous commitment to working in a bipartisan fashion to maintain and enhance this fabulous system. They understand the unique economic and environmental advantage the system provides the Northwest. They understand that the money Bonneville spends does not come from federal appropriations and instead comes from ratepayers, as the only money BPA has comes from selling power and transmission services. This is particularly important as the difficulties of getting federal appropriations increases. They understand without the revenue generated by the federal hydro system, it would be very difficult to get funding for the many programs BPA currently supports that helps improve the quality of life in the Northwest. And they fully comprehend the value of a cost-based, not-for-profit system and have successfully gone to battle to assure that benefit is retained for the Northwest. And they can see the debates over air emissions other parts of the country are dealing with and know how important protecting the environment is to the Northwest. I want to call out in particular 3 members from Oregon who I've spent considerable time with over the last 2 decades. Senator Wyden is constantly opening my eyes to opportunities to how to best serve the interests of the public across the state because he works so hard to stay in touch with people all the way across this state. Representative Greg Walden is bright, engaging, and always thinking about how to solve problems. And finally, to Representative Peter DeFazio, who is the acknowledged expert within the Northwest Delegation on regional electricity issues because of his personal interest in the issues and the time he is willing to spend on them. So times are pretty good today, at least as good as the good old days. Our Northwest Congressional Delegation is strong, and it shows in terms of results. Just in the last decade, we have witnessed tremendous progress on a variety of contentious issues that would not have happened without the bipartisan support from across the Northwest Congressional Delegation. This message from our delegation has been clear for a long time. We will go to bat for the region when necessary, but we should attempt to resolve our problems in the region whenever possible, because there are other parts of the country who are envious of what we have. And when we fight among ourselves, we risk losing the incredible benefits that we enjoy. Examples of things that have gone well here recently. The electric power system is incredibly capital intensive, and this is an aging system. In 2000, Bonneville had the ability to borrow not more than $3.25 billion from a revolving fund at the U.S. Treasury. At the insistence of the Northwest Congressional Delegation, Bonneville has been good financial stewards, as evidenced by 29 straight years of making its scheduled payment to Treasury. And in fact, last year, that payment was in excess of $800 million. And because of that, we were able to go back to the Congress and seek an increase in that ability to borrow money. Today, the Congress has increased that authorization to $7.7 billion, more than doubling in a decade. And new tools like third-party financing have added $1 billion more. Today, Bonneville has access to more than $9 billion for capital investments, a near tripling in the last decade. And our congressional delegation made that happen. This is critical due to the needs of an aging system. Bonneville completed in 1937, Grand Coulee in 1942. If we are to retain the value of the system, it requires a large capital investment program over the coming decades. Another area where we've been able to come together, the salmon and steelhead restoration program we are implementing has been supported by such strange bedfellows as the Bush and Obama administration, the states of Washington, Idaho, and Montana under governors of different political stripes, as well as 6 Native American tribes. And another issue. Remember I mentioned that program that provides approximately $75 million annually to keep your rates lower? That program has been subject to nearly 30 years of litigation. We are on the verge of getting out of the federal courtroom on that issue with an agreement supported by the vast majority of litigants, which would help to stabilize your rates. We've added somewhere around 6,000 megawatts of wind to the Northwest system since 2005, and moreover have built and are building transmission to accommodate it, while other parts of the country are struggling with getting transmission built. It's just by way of saying this system works best when we work together collaboratively to solve problems. Fortunately, we have a long history of being successful at that, and candidly, that culture is created by our Northwest Congressional Delegation. Now, as I prepare to retire, I'd like to tell you that all is good, and there is nothing but smooth sailing for my successor, Bill Drummond, who's in the audience today. But unfortunately, that would not be true. The challenges in front of us are immense. We are going to need to continue to find ways to work regionally, collaboratively, and in a bipartisan fashion to address the issues that are coming up in the near future and will affect you as residents of Portland. For example, the Columbia River Treaty, signed in 1964 between the governments of the United States and Canada, and led to the building of dams in Canada that were mostly paid for with benefits generated in the United States. Upstream dams control the flow of water. We get benefits from that downstream. The first right to reconsider the treaty comes up in 2024, when either country has the right to unilaterally terminate, although to exercise that right, either country has to give 10 years notice. That means 2014 becomes a critical date, and 2014 is nearly upon us. Bonneville and the Corps of Engineers, as the agencies with responsibility for implementing the treaty, have begun a process for treaty review with states, tribes, and stakeholders across the Northwest. The original treaty spoke to flood control and power. There was no environmental consideration. Candidly, in 1964, there was no National Environmental Policy Act, no Endangered Species Act, and the ecosystem needs of the region have to be addressed as we go forward. The U.S. bought flood control for 60 years, but not beyond, under the terms of the treaty. It's going to be important to Portland and Vancouver and others along the river that a new regime be developed for coordinating dam operations for flood control purposes. And finally, there is a large electric power component of the arrangement. Currently, the United States sends huge amounts of electricity, roughly a nuclear plant's worth of energy, to Canada daily, and in a manner that is very flexible, a product that is increasing as the system adds more wind power. In our view, we are overpaying the Canadians based on the realities of how the system has evolved. And yet we also recognize the Canadians are our greatest ally and our largest trading partner. We need to formulate a position within the Northwest that meets the region's needs for ecosystem protection, for flood control, and a fair allocation of electricity benefits, and does so in a respectful way with our Canadian neighbors. And we need to do it soon, because the treaty continues under its current terms unless action is taken, which creates risk to flood control and a continuation of the less than equitable allocation of power benefits. Another key issue for you is transmission. I would guess that most of you would not know that there has been no major new transmission built into the Portland area in more than 40 years. And I will tell you it is time. Our planners suggest that without new transmission, Portland and Southwest Washington would be incurring an unacceptable reliability risk beginning in roughly 2018. We have proposed a new transmission line to address this problem, running from Longview to Troutdale, that is undergoing environmental review, and we have recently picked a preferred route for that line. I will tell you it's going to be very important to you that we be successful at getting that line built. Moreover, we have a variety of other lines that are under construction that are critical to the development of wind power in the region. The John Day-McNary line, not surprisingly, stretching between the John Day and McNary dams, that allowed another 500 megawatts of wind on this system, was completed in February. I'm happy to say a project that was originally estimated to cost $350 million and came in at $200 million, and 11 months ahead of schedule. And the Big Eddy Night Line, which is under construction right now, will allow another 3,000 megawatts of wind power onto the system. And we have projects in the planning phase. We're working cooperatively with our friends at Pacific Power and Idaho Power to build transmission that will better connect the east and west sides of the region. And just recently, we announced with Portland General Electric a memorandum of understanding to jointly develop another transmission path into Portland that could potentially alleviate the need for a project PGE has been planning to build that would have crossed the Cascade Mountains just to the south of here. That project is designed primarily to move new renewable resources, and it is a great example of how, when we work collaboratively from the perspective of a one utility planning, as opposed to working in our own individual interests, that the Northwest will benefit, as the new alternative costs less and has substantially less environmental impact. As we look to how we will meet our energy needs in the future, we know that the resource of choice is energy efficiency. It's the most cost-effective resource, the most environmentally benign resource, and it can be accomplished most efficiently if it's developed collaboratively across utility service territories. We've had great success in accomplishing rapidly increasing goals for energy efficiency acquisition, working, for example, with the Oregon Energy Trust, but we have to keep moving. And in the fish and wildlife arena, it's critical that Bonneville follows through on our commitments, completing the work on mitigation activities. This is a more than $100 million a year program that is healing watersheds across the Northwest, including the Deschutes, the Grand Ronde, and the John Day. Now, beyond completing that plan, we need to begin to address the issues associated with the term of the plan, which is set to expire in 2018. Planning for the next phase needs to begin now. It's time for this region to go beyond the impacts of individual actions and consider what it takes to get to recovery of Columbia Basin salmon and steelhead. Recovery is a big subject, and it requires all human-caused sources of mortality to be at the table. This will be hard. We thought what we've done in the past has been hard. This will be very hard. But it fits the model that we have in the Northwest of working collaboratively to solve problems. And we have challenges with respect to wind integration. Our goals have been to advance renewable resource development while preserving reliability and ensuring the payment of costs follow the causation of costs. It is absolutely clear regionally we've been successful at the first goal because the wind power that is now on the system exceeds the regional forecast for its development by nearly a decade. So far, we've kept up in terms of learning on the fly how to operate with a large amount of resource and maintain reliability on the system. We do this despite the fact that we have the highest ratio of wind to load of any transmission system in the country, and from what we can tell, the third highest in the world. This is providing us a great opportunity. Every threat is an opportunity. Our opportunity is to lead in the development of creative solutions for managing the intermittent nature of wind. From our experience, we now know that there can be substantial ramps of wind power output that challenge system operations and reliability. As we develop low-cost solutions for managing this intermittent resource, those solutions have costs, and for the most part, we've resolved the allocation of those costs. But there are a few challenges out there, like when we have a surplus of hydro and wind in the spring. You may have read some about that. These are big challenges for us, but I am quite hopeful that we'll find ways to resolve that as well. The smart grid. Electricity is harder than rocket science. I believe that. Trying to make loads and resources balance in real time. It takes a fabulous communication system to make that work. We have one in the Northwest with an extensive fiber network that helps control the flow of electrons on the transmission system. We have used that as the basis to establish the largest smart grid demonstration program in the country, right here in the Pacific Northwest, including with our partners at Portland General Electric. Our key challenge now is establishing the business case for the expansion of smart grid investments, because our North Star is what creates value for ratepayers. And I want to use this moment to ask you to give some thought to the whole issue of earthquake preparedness. Life as we know it depends on electricity. We see what it is like to live around New York City or the Gulf of Mexico when natural disaster hits. How disruptive it can be when the electricity does not work. Our challenge in this region is to be prepared for the risk of our natural disaster, which is earthquake. The knowledge of earthquake risk has grown substantially in the last decade. Fortunately, the hydro system, because of its mass, is mostly immune from the potential havoc associated with earthquakes, but our transmission and control systems are not. We are trying to catch up by hardening our assets and preparing our people for what appears to be an inevitable event, where the only question is, when will it happen? Restoring electric service will be difficult in the aftermath of an earthquake. Hopefully we will have done a great deal to harden and come up as quickly as we can. But I would urge each of you to be prepared. Another huge challenge, and maybe the biggest one of all, for the next administrator, and in fact for any administrator, is the refurbishment of the hydro system. As I said earlier, the system is aging. It is such a big system that the refurbishment will take decades and has to be staged because one cannot have multiple generating units of this magnitude out of service simultaneously and still retain reliability. I view this as the most important responsibility of the administrator because it's the allocation of benefits from this tremendously valuable system that creates the controversy that seems to swirl around Bonneville. Remember that when you see or hear about Bonneville policies that become newsworthy. Most likely, the core of that controversy is about the allocation of benefits. And that controversy is actually a good thing because it means there is value to argue over. I would not wish for the alternative. So let me finish with this thought. We are blessed to live in the Northwest for many reasons, but one of which is that we get 60% of our electricity from a renewable, non-polluting, reliable source that keeps our air cleaner and our rates lower than most other parts of the world. Does the hydro system have work to do to mitigate its impacts on the environment? Absolutely. But should it be retained because it creates huge economic and environmental advantage for our region and can provide the backbone for a clean, reliable, low-cost future for the Northwest? Absolutely. Now we look to the future. We have something special, something unique, a river of opportunity. Because of what we have built together for all who live in the Northwest, we are freer than others to dream great dreams, as outsized as the ones at the beginning of this 75-year-long chapter. Then we brought down the barriers that stood in the way of people's hopes to be able to live a life free from poverty. Today we seek to go further, to bring down the barriers that separate economic success from ecological health and unite them in common purpose. This river and this hydro system make that possible. Roll on, Columbia, roll on.
Thank you very much, Steve, for those comments and for that run down memory lane for those of us who have grown up in the Northwest. A lot of our personal history is connected with what's happened with the growth of Bonneville. And now, if you have a written question on an index card, please hold it up high so that City Club staff can come and collect it from you. Thank you. The first question for our speaker, as always, will be from today's Friday Forum host, Bill Holmer. Bill is the president of the first Princeton Corporation. Bill joined City Club in 1999 and currently serves as the club's treasurer and chair of its finance committee. Bill?
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Steve, for your comments. You mentioned the need for a new transmission line going from Troutdale to Longview. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you see as the preferred route and what are the environmental and health risks associated with that?
So we're about 4 years into the planning for that project. We started with a variety of different routes, and essentially the question is, how do you get south from the Longview area to the Portland area? Among the options that we considered was a route that went along the west side of the Columbia and therefore would have been in the state of Oregon. And we rejected that in the early phases because it looked to us we were trying to figure out how do you create the choice between the value of choices that really the region is confronted with. And we found that with the 3 routes that we were looking at on the Washington side, we had a route that went through an urban area, through an existing right-of-way, a route that went sort of down the middle of that section of country, and then a route that went down the right-hand side, the east side, next to the Cascades. And what that did is it created an option between where do you want to, is it better to go with a lower cost option that goes, that would impact a number of people, probably 3,000 people would have been within 500 feet of that line, versus a route that moves further away from people. The preferred route that we chose will cost more to build. We chose a route that will impact maybe in the range of 300 people that would be within 500 feet of the line. So one of the key issues for us was thinking that through. There also were a host of environmental implications associated with the choice of the line. One of the big concerns has been electromagnetic forces and their potential impact on human health and safety. We have done an extensive amount of research, as has the Electric Power Research Institute, and we are unable to find a correlation between the impacts of EMF on human health and human health. Having said that, we still try to find ways to minimize the EMF forces and their impact on people. Part of that is in route selection, part of that is in terms of how we will do tower design. And the goal is to try to find something, and we're a public sector agency, we're here to serve the public, to have the least possible impact on the public as we possibly can.
We will now take questions from the floor. As always, we invite members to the microphone to ask their questions. Asking questions at the Friday Forum microphone is a privilege of City Club membership and is open to everyone. Please, before asking your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question as directly as possible. If I flash the infamous question mark, it means please wrap up your question.
Dr. Roger Meyer, country doctor, and my question twofold. One, I'd like to know what you're doing to make the tribe's position more participatory, and I know that Billy Franks says, my friend up in the Nisqually tribe has been one of your big partners and diplomatically has helped you work that through, but I wonder what else you're doing because they've suffered grievously a lot of cultural stuff, and it's not really clear what BPA is doing to restore make them whole. The second, I wonder, as a member of a couple of the committees at the City Club, particularly the advocacy, what are you doing to educate particularly students about power issue? Because most kids just turn the switch on. They don't really understand the ecology and economics. I wonder if that's part of your educational plan.
2 great questions. So with respect to the tribes, and I would refer you to Roy Sampsell, who's sitting over at one of the tables and has represented the tribes for many years to further articulate the way we are working together with tribes these days. I'll tell you a simple story. In 2005, there was a biological opinion that had been put in place that was challenged in court, and it was thrown out by the court. It was a great disappointment to us as an agency and the other agencies that operate the river. And one of the things that the judge said was you need to go seek to do more in working with the region in a collaborative way. And I was a little bruised and had a few abrasions from that, I admit, and it took me a little while to get past that. But the key thing that I think we did is we set up a series of bilateral discussions with the plaintiffs, including the region's tribes that have participated in the litigation. And we went in and we had a simple conversation. Look, we lost. We know we lost. Let's talk about what you want. And it was amazing to me to find out that that was a new way of having the conversation that had been had before. And it led to the Columbia Basin Fish Accords. It took us 3 years, but it led to the accords. And what we are finding now is that once you take that first step in terms of communication, it allows you to resolve a whole host of other issues. The meeting that I had with the Yakima tribe earlier this week, we talked a lot about the implementation of the fish accords and a project that we had been working on up on the Klickitat River. But we also talked about a transmission line, the Big Eddy Night line that I mentioned earlier, that's going to cross tribal land, and how we had been able to resolve an issue with respect to cultural resources, and that was mostly because we had a relationship that we had not had before. It truly is incredible when the synergies that can be generated once you take that step into trustworthy communication. It is a hard step to take, though. I will be honest with you about that. With respect to students, I think it is one of the great challenges, and part of the reason that I give this speech, and I've been trying to give it around the region, is to have more people understand about the incredible value of this hydropower system. It is mostly invisible to people. It's mostly invisible, particularly to young people. My own kids have no clue what it is I do, although they're very happy when they charge up the video games. So what we've been trying to do, and you can find things on our website and other places where we've been trying to just tell the story and have people understand that you have something really special and unique when you live here in the Northwest, and that because it is the public's assets, it will only be retained if the public understands it and treasures it. It is yours, and without that knowledge, this system will go downhill. So we're trying our best. We would be open to ideas and thoughts that you might have about ways we could do that better.
Chris Andre, City Club member. I have a plea. I hope this does not, that this transmission line does not end up impacting Troutdale. Troutdale does not have a lot going for it other than the fact that it bills itself as the gateway to the gorge. It also has an abundance of piercing tattoo shops. So what we don't need is piercing tattoos in a gigantic transmission line. That said, my question is this. Cheap energy causes higher consumption. That's not what we need at this time. And of course, higher consumption puts stresses throughout the entire system, which of course impact shareholders' bottom line. The shareholders love it because all the companies involved in supporting higher consumption do well. How do you resolve that?
Two things. The bad news for you is our transmission line will not be displacing the tattoo shops in Troutdale. Where we're siting the transmission line is actually there are existing transmission lines there that cross the river from Camas over to Troutdale, and it actually ends right at the river in Troutdale. So it should have practically no impact on the local community there. With respect to your second question, we probably differ with respect to policy. I think it is important that we have low electric rates. I think it makes a big difference in terms of the economy of the Northwest. But I do think there are ways to achieve the policy objectives that you're describing without necessarily just raising electricity rates. The way that we choose to do that is that the biggest advantage from higher rates is to reduce consumption and find ways to be able to operate more efficiently. And the goal for us has been to be able to send the right price signal. Energy efficiency is lower cost than the alternative generating resource that's out there, to provide what some people would call a subsidy, and we view as a cost-effective investment in energy efficiency, so that we make sure that we get the lowest cost, and I would say the most environmentally benign power system that one can get. So it's that key that we choose a different tactic, I would say, to achieve the goal that you're describing.
Let me ask one of the written questions, in fact, two of them that seem to be related. Interruptible sources work best if energy storage is available. How much of this can be done by the dams? And the related question is, what is the latest and greatest in electricity storage?
So those are really important questions for the region right now. What we've discovered is we've added the wind power to our system is it does require a substantial amount of backup capability to be able to address the ramps, because again, when wind power ramps up or down, some other generating resource has to go in the opposite direction or else the lights go out. And what we are discovering is that the capability of the hydro system to provide that ramping is substantial, but it is meeting the end of its ability to be able to provide that service relative to the close to 6,000 megawatts of wind that's operating on the system today. And so we are going to have to find some new mechanisms to be able to provide that capability, because it seems unlikely we're going to stop with the wind power development with where we're at. The best opportunities to be able to address wind power or storage needs on the system today, it looks like to us, is demand response from a cost effectiveness standpoint. So the opportunity, we've been running energy efficiency programs this region where we just try to reduce the amount of kilowatt hours used. We probably are going to have to start thinking more about the time of use. And we actually are running pilot programs right now where we connect up water heaters to wind power generators, and we, in effect, we heat water in your home at a time when the wind power is blowing, or when the wind is blowing, and turn it off when the wind is not, and you can generally get still the kind of hot water that you need. Seems to be working. We're going to have to think a lot more creatively about how we provide storage. The other types of alternatives that are out there that people hear about, pump storage, batteries, flywheels, other types of activities, candidly are quite expensive. We will need to see some, we hope to see some change in the price curve for those over time.
Jean?
Jeannie Crouch, City Club member. Thanks for your presentation today. You talked about the importance of earthquake preparedness, and I'm just wondering what's the status of the dams themselves in terms of being basically earthquake hardened?
Turns out when you build a dam, it's pretty earthquake hardened. And it's an amazing thing, really. They just have so much mass, so much concrete that they generally are in pretty good shape with respect to withstanding the types of earthquakes that we think are out there. And that's why I spoke to the issue of our biggest concerns are transmission and control systems. And our primary efforts right now are focused on, for example, we're building a backup control center on the east side of the Cascades so that if we do have a devastating earthquake on this side, that we have the capability to bring the system back up and to operate it, that damage to buildings here would not put us out of business. And we're trying to harden different elements of the transmission system. Again, mass is the critical piece. So you can look at something and sort of see how big it is, and you've got a sense of how safe it's going to be in the midst of an earthquake.
That large dam is pretty solid.
Leslie Johnson, City Club member. I had experience in August last summer of driving some back roads with a new sporty little car and coming up over a rise near the eastern end of the gorge and seeing for the first time the really large fields of installations of the wind turbines. And I certainly had a sense of there is some awesome beauty and grace to those tall white turbines and their slow rotation, but I was born in Hood River, and the impact on the more primitive, bare majesty of that region is a little hard for me to take. And I wonder if you could say if we've reached the optimum use of that particular part of the country for wind generation, and if we have, and if there's plans for more, if somebody has in mind what the optimum amount should be given how it changes the landscape.
I think one of the things that we're finding is there are some concerns out there with respect to the expansive nature of the wind power development in the Columbia River Gorge. We certainly hear it from our friends at the Yakima tribe who have been talking to us in particular about the development of this transmission line and what the implications of that line are. Having said that, I don't believe we're at the end of wind power development. The question remains as to where that wind power development should take place. There are opportunities. I said earlier that the wind that blows in the Columbia River Gorge is really good wind, but it's not the best wind in the West. There are opportunities out there for wind, and particularly in the Plain States in Montana, elsewhere, that can produce higher capacity factor, which means you get more energy out of the unit because the wind blows more frequently or harder in other places. And one of the keys there will be transmission development. At the moment, though, I will tell you that in the West, there has been a plateauing of wind power development over the course of the last year or two as the states of Oregon and Washington have mostly met their renewable portfolio standards. And California, while it has not, has made a choice to not import renewables to meet its renewable portfolio standards. So what we're seeing is more of a plateauing of demand at this point. When that comes off, I think the questions about where the growth in wind power development will occur will probably be more robust in this region than they have been in the past.
Let me ask another of the written questions. Who is the major holder of BPA's third-party debt?
So we have about half of our debt is federal debt, and about half of our debt is third-party debt. The vast majority of that third-party debt is associated with the nuclear power plant development. What was originally known as the Washington Public Power Supply System plants 1, 3, and 2. 1 and 3 were terminated, 2 was completed and is operating. That's probably close to about $7 billion worth of debt. That's private bondholders. The bonds are sold in the municipal markets, and so their folks are spread all across the country and the world.
Another question. In the 1970s, there was a near war between public power and private power. What's happened to that issue?
Well, I spoke to that briefly, but I didn't really describe it in that context. The war between privates and publics is really about the differences between rates. And in the Northwest, we're a patchwork quilt of public utility systems and privately owned systems. And you could have people pretty close to each other, sometimes even across the street, who could have rates quite different from each other. And the Congress and the Northwest Congressional Delegation chose to resolve that through a program called the Residential Exchange, in which, in effect, Bonneville provides checks to investor-owned utilities to help levelize the rates between public and privately owned utilities for the residential, or at least for the privately owned utilities, for the residential and small farm customers. That has been in litigation for nearly 30 years. There was a very difficult court decision that really sort of set the region aflame back in 2009. I have to tell you that I am really, really pleased with the progress that's been made in the last few years. We work to get people together, but from that point, the public and privately owned utilities really carried the ball to try to develop a settlement. And there is a settlement out there that represents all of the investor-owned utilities, nearly all of the publicly owned utilities, and just last month, one of the remaining litigants chose to drop out of that litigation. So we are quite close, I think, on the verge of actually seeing peace in our time with respect to the battles between publics and privates.
Well, since Dave Graff, City Club member, since this discussion is about the BPA and the dams on the Columbia, it would seem that we should at some point talk about salmon. Would you like to do that now?
I thought I talked about it in my talk, but I'd be happy to talk about it more.
I know, but I mean, in terms of where do we stand in the efforts to mitigate issues for this salmon? I know that a lot of progress has been made. Is there more you can tell us?
Yeah, I think the program that has been agreed to by 3 states, Washington, Idaho, and Montana, and the 6 Native American tribes, along with the federal agencies representing the river user or the river operators community, as well as the agencies in charge of the biology, NOAA Fisheries and others, is essentially one that says we're going to put our eggs in a lot of different baskets. We're going to make huge investments with respect to trying to be able to get juveniles downstream. It turns out we're pretty good at getting adults upstream. The hard part is getting juveniles downstream. They hit the reservoir. It's a long way to get through the reservoir. Then they got to get past the concrete structure. That's hard too. So we've spent more than $1 billion basically on a bet that we would put in a new technology that is now installed at 7 of the 8 main stem dams on the Columbia and Snake that helps to get juveniles past the concrete structures. And the good news with the data that's come in just in the last couple of months is it appears that it's working. We set biological performance standards. We wanted to achieve 96% survival for spring fish coming through the system and 93% for summer fish. And it appears that we're hitting those. I'm pleased to say, and I have to admit I knew I was taking a big gamble with ratepayer money, and so I was a little worried about how this would work out, but it looks like it's working. Beyond that, what we did is we said, we know that if we get the fish through the hydro system, it's going to be important for them to have the ability to produce and rear in the tributaries. And although we don't have dams in the tributaries, we're going to go invest in off-site mitigation to help mitigate for the damage done by the major dams on the main stem Columbia and Snake. So these programs are amazing, and I'd urge you to go to our website sometime and take a look at what's going on out there, because what they are doing is restoring river health across the Northwest. Now that happens to be for salmon and steelhead, or at least that's the reason we're doing it, but when you restore river health, you do it for all aquatic species that reside in that river. And so we have investments all the way across, the Entiat, the Wenatchee, the Deschutes, John Day, Grand Ronde, you name it. There are investments going on where we are improving the tributary health. And again, the evidence is that seems to make a difference. So we feel like we're making some good progress. As I said in my speech, I don't think we're done. We have a ways to go yet, but it feels like we're on the right path.
We have run out of time for further questions and have to stop for the day. Please join us next week for the State of the County with Multnomah County Chair Jeff Cogan. And as we close today, please join me in thanking our speaker today as he retires from one of the most important and significant jobs in the region And thank you for your 32 years of service and your leadership of the agency on behalf of the City Club. We appreciate your coming here for your valedictory address.
Thank you, Pat.